Mm-hmm.
Okay. Alright, let's go. So, as and when we open Blender, we are encountered with these three elements. Today we'll have nothing to do with the three of them mostly. I'll just turn on this shortcut. Okay, let's go. So, today we'll be learning texturing, texturing. That means to put texture to objects. So, where can we see this texture? First of all, we can see this texture in material preview mode and rendered mode. So let's go to material preview mode. This we will switch to shader editor. That is where texturing happens. So when we open the tab for texturing, this is what we are encountered with. This is called Principal BSDL. There are markers here like base color, subsurface scattering, metallic roughness, clear coat, transmission, emission, normal. These are the parameters that we can change. So let's guess what will happen. Atharva, can you mute your mic?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. You can speak up when you feel like. Alright, so base color. If we change the base color, this becomes blue now. And if we view it in. Okay, this is blue now. I'll shift the render engine to cycles and 10 samples begins. Okay, so let's guess what will happen if I increase the roughness. Object will become more and more rough. What will happen if I decrease it? It will become more and more smooth on the surface. So it becomes very smooth. It and if I increase the roughness all the way, it becomes almost like a mirror. You see, this is the light source that it is reflecting. So yeah. Anyways, so then the other parameter that we have is metallicness. Okay. So this will make the object more and more metallic, which is like more metal-like essentially. So yeah, these are the parameters that we have to play with. You can also give it emission. Right now there is no emission because the color is black. So I make it blue. This object will emit light basically. So even if there is no light source, it will still emit light. Uh, so yeah, see, it is emitting light, which is being reflected on this plane. So anyways, yeah, these are the parameters. Then we have something called normal. Normal basically is there's one thing called normal map, which shows the perpendicular data of the object. So how the surface behaves in x-axis. That is essentially, in some sense, what normal map is about. Then yeah, so that's the basics of material rendering, but giving materials to objects. Now let's talk about texture. Texture is the surface detail of it. So if I go to Blender, if I press Shift A or Add, then I go to texture. I can give it a brick texture. I can give it environment texture, gradient texture, etc. etc. Let's give it a noise texture. Directly add it here. You can see it has added a noise here. there's some sort of a noise happening. Anyways, now there's another thing called the color ramp. This is one of the most important nodes in Blender. These are basically called nodes. This to connect one thing to the other and control their data is called nodes. So if I plug this in, mm, and let's decrease. So yeah, it has added a noise texture. Then I can play with the scale of this. I can increase the detail, increase the roughness, etc. So let's this same thing, it can be plugged into multiple things. So let's say roughness. Now what will happen here is whatever is black in the noise texture will become smooth, and whatever is white will become rough. Similarly, if we add this to metallic, now let's see what will happen. Let's add a light source. Uh, Come on, let's go. Yeah. Similarly, whatever is black is white in this has become metallic, and whatever is the opposite, white, has become uh, non-metallic, has stayed the same basically. So these are the this is how you use this color ramp texture. You plug it into noise texture, or if you don't plug it into noise texture, let's see what it does. It just makes a gradient, subtle gradient. See it's it's like adjusting the levels. It's like doing levels adjustment in Photoshop. So anyways, I hope you understand what noise texture, how noise texture can be used in this, and it can be used here, and you can also change the color of this. So let's say you want a blue color and there's some discoloration happening. So yeah, this is how you do it. You can distort the texture as well, but I usually don't play with that. I just play with roughness, scale, and detail. Similar to the noise texture is the Musgrave texture. Musgrave. It's quite similar. So I'll plug this in here, increase the scale. Basically, these are the parameters you play with. Increase the details, decrease the dimension, and play with this. Whatever parameter is given to us. So this is one thing. Let's see what there's another thing called bump. If you put bump into normal map and here, you see there is a slight change in the slight let's see, let's remove it and see what happens. There's a slight bump which it adds, and you can sort of play with it. Again, if I increase the subdivisions, yeah, it slightly adds a bit more dimension to your like a z-axis dimension to your texture, very slight. But let's see what we can do with if you plug it into displacement and not normal map here. Now this is where it actually works. You see, it has, now we can clearly see that this is giving it a bump, and if we invert it, the same thing tends to happen upside down. But if you zoom in clearly, there's no change to the mesh. It has only happened on the surface. So it appears as if there has been some bump. So let's. This is what I usually sort of use while texturing. Uh, but these are parametric textures which you have generated them. There are other kinds of texture which we'll cover today. Anyways, let's see what is this thing. This is called material output node. If you remove this, there is no output happening. So then we go into output and we put material output and plug it in. Only then can we see the texture being displayed, because we've put an output node. Principal BSDF is I think it's an input node. Oh no, it's a textured node. Or you can just search Principal BSDF. Yeah. So these are the two important textures that you should know about: Musgrave and noise texture, and color ramp, and how to use color ramp. Now, how do you know people add like these kind of textures, like advanced textures like this? Mm, like any, let's look at this. How has how have people done this? Let's ask this question to ourselves. This basic rendering. Now they've painted on top of it. But how do we get to this level? The thing is, we don't really make these textures unless you are a texture artist. So there's this thing called Quixel Bridge. You go to Quixel Megascan's website and download Bridge for Blender, and you open it. This is basically a material library which you can use to essentially load textures on your Blender files. So I've already downloaded some textures. Um, let's try to import a texture. So yeah. Okay, now once we click export, the thing is, this is the material library. See, you can just just search rock, and then it will give you rock textures. It has a very deep library of textures, so, and 3D assets as well. So now that I imported one texture previously, I can find it here, damage brick. Now what we can see here is that this texture is not being mapped properly. It is being distorted. So how do we fix that? There are ways to fix it. First of all, when we import textures, we should see that the roughness is connected to the roughness and not specular. The normal map should be connected to normal map and not emission. These are things you have to make sure of. Now how did I'll just talk about this, but this is called the mapping node, and it tells you how the texture will be mapped on the surface. So you can change this and roughly figure out how the texture will map. So let's, yeah, see, it feels somewhat believable. Let's do this. Yeah. Okay. Let's see how this texture looks. Okay. Something feels a bit off in this texture. Okay, now that I think it was the lighting. But see, we already have this texture now. We can use it. like this. But see now, if I have applied the same texture here, and now that I change the dimensions of this object, the texture is getting skewed now. So for this object, if I try to, I can't really. You see the problem. If I change the texture from this node, it gets changed in both the places, and I wouldn't want it to do that. So what I'll do is, there is one thing called UV mapping. What UV mapping does is it shows how the texture maps to the surface. So if you unwrap the object, how will it look like? So to see the UV, how do you navigate in the UV map, UV editing uh, section is, UV editor is, you select the object, go into edit mode. Now if you press A to select all the vertices, each vertex will be displayed here, you see. Now let's give it this texture. Now let's say I want only this face to be correct. So what I'll do is, I'll find it in UV map and I'll press S and X to scale the texture accordingly. And if you rotate it, it will be rotated as well. So you can play with the UV map instead of changing the scale of the texture. Similarly, it has only worked here, but if I wanted the whole thing to be changed, then I have to change the whole thing. I select everything and just change the scale of it. Now in UV mapping, there is one, if you press U, you can choose how to how to project the texture. So you can unwrap it, or you can do smart UV project. I usually prefer smart UV project, and I put the island margin of 0.02. Island margin means the distance between these 2 points, that is 0.02. Now if I select all of them and I scale it, I rotate the texture according to my will. I should do it upside down, I think. So there is, so what we just did was press U and smart UV project. Another way to project texture on the surface is cube projection. One of the most easiest, I believe, to use. So it just makes it one object. So yeah, then you can do this, and you already have something familiar. Let's increase the light to 1000. Then you can instead of I'll just show you what I tend to do. So if I press SX and manipulate the object, I have to again go here. See, the mesh, the texture is getting squished along with the object. So I'll just project it again and again scale it according to my eyes. Or what I'll do is, instead of changing it in, I'll just change it in edit mode. So yeah, so again the texture is getting squished. Now how do we stop that from happening? When in edit mode, if you keep keep correct face attributes, then it won't get squished, you know. So here you go. Yeah, I have this thing that looks like a brick wall. Yeah, so I think this is what texturing is about. Now let's look at what YouTube resources we can look at for texturing. One of the most important YouTubers is Ian Hubert. What he has is called 1 minute tutorials, which are which are like lazy tutorials. He's
Hey,
doing
welcome to
this thing
Lazy
called
Tutorials.
tutorials.
Make a
So you can watch his lazy tutorials on texturing. Uh, let's go here. Mm, he teaches you how to make stickers, how to make pipes in Blender, how to model an air conditioner. Basically, these are very quick tutorials, and you'll just love this. Let's talk about one more thing, which is image projection, image texture. Let's say I have a plane and I want a texture to be on top of it. Like I want a poster on this wall, for example. First of all, I'll give it some thickness. Then we'll talk about modifiers in a later class. But first, I wanted to cover texturing as well because Atharva already knows uh, modifiers, some of them. So what you have to do is, if you click here into add and input, you can find one thing called the image texture. So let's search it, image texture, yeah, and you plug it into base color. Now because there is no image, it shows a pink color, but let's say we did have an image which was uh, I don't know, let's pick this. Oh, so once I click it, it's already here. Now if I change the photo, it changes. So this is a very important tool in Blender, I believe. But the thing is, see, now the image is getting distorted because it doesn't match the proportion of the original image. This is where again you go into UV editor and edit the UVs. So you see, if I do this and I try to like eyeball it, or what I can do is cube projection, and yeah. So yeah, I think this is quite important for you to know. And you can also let's see what else can you do with this. mm, what if I added masquerade texture? Oh, it does something weird I never expected. It just fucks with the texture a lot. So yeah, that's one more important thing you should know, image textures. uh, yep. So that's what, let's see how else can we use the image texture. um, let's add something building. uh, okay, stone. Let's say we wanted to model this, so we save this and save it here. I'll go into image texture, I go into texture, create new, shift A, add an image texture, plug it into base color, load my texture here. Now what I'll do is increase the size, uh, I'll just increase the I'll just adjust the proportions of the image to the proportions of the plane. I'll just add a loop cut with Control R. What I'll do is so I'll select this image plane and take it inside. See, I'm already giving it some depth. So this technique I learned from Ian Huberts. It's not my own technique, I should tell you. But in any case, so let's select this face and take it inside. And how can you forget this? So now if we put the scene in Blender and we put some light here, like here, try to match the lighting. From afar it will, if this was far in a scene, one could already assume that, oh, maybe this is real. So this is the power of texturing. I just demonstrated this to show you how efficiently textures can be used in a scene, and how we can use lighting, etc., to sort of win our way. Then I'll just select these edges and extrude them along the y-axis. It looks a bit decent, I guess, but you can keep working and make it better. So I think this should be enough for texturing for now. If you face any doubts, you should let me know, and definitely watch Ian Hubert's tutorials. And if you want to know how to do some specific things, let me know. Also do download the Quixel Bridge, one of the most important asset and texture libraries. There are more complex operations with textures that I should also let you know about. There's one thing called the mix texture. So let's say we have this brick texture and we want to show that there's some paint on the wall which is, been worn off, then there's some paint again, then there's some plaster, then there's brick. So you want to show these layers. How do we do that? Let's just figure it out. There's one thing called mix texture, mix shader. So you plug this thing into this and copy this thing, add any color you want. In this fac, which is called the factor, you should plug in color ramp, which we talked about at the start of the class. Alright. Then add a noise texture to it, or a Musgrave. Let's go with the noise texture for now. Plug this into factor node. See already? Okay, now we have some texture. If you just play with the parameters of it, increase the detail, the roughness. Yeah. I don't like how it is working out though. Maybe I can invert it. You can play with the levels adjustment as well, or you can invert the colors as well. Now let's say you want this to bump as well, so we go to displacement, or we just go to bump. You plug this into this thing, okay, and plug it into displacement. it is bumping. Now if we decrease the strength to like, if we just slightly decrease it like 0.02 or 0.01, it will have subtle, yeah, and we invert it. Oh, okay, right now it's not, it's taking it inside, but it should actually pop it out. Let's do the opposite then. But I hope you get the point. We'll just switch the places of this. Yeah, now we have it, see? Now it looks as if thick paint is being chipped off and hard, then brick texture is being visible. But for this you should have a mesh with more subdivisions. In any case, you should know how to mix the texture using the mix shader. Simple color ramp noise texture factor. With little bit of experimentation, you should be able to figure it out. So yeah, I think this is all for the texture. Now I'll just summarize the concepts I tried to cover with you so that you don't forget it. Okay, let's write it on the wall here. Number one is shit. I'll remove the texture. Okay, now that we've cleaned the wall. Number one is noise texture. Number 0.1 is base color, roughness, metallicness, emission, etc. The original parameters. Then we add noise texture into this, into the base color, into this. Noise texture can go into any of these. We plug the noise texture with color ramp, which is that black and white thing which has this thing here, and you sort of slide these two together and far apart, and it has a thing called fractal here, something in those lines, and you connect it to the factor here. So the color ramp to the principal, and to the color ramp is texture is put the noise texture. Noise has some parameters such as scale, detail. There's one more which I'm forgetting. Roughness. Similar to noise is Musgrave. Then I told you about image texture. I told you about bridge, Quixel bridge, which I'll put the link to in the class. Quixel bridge. Then I showed you mix texture, mix shader, where you can merge one texture with another, one of this with the other, and this into the output node. And here it is connected to noise texture, to color ramp, which is connected to the noise texture. Then we talked about image projection. So many topics we covered. You don't need to memorize all of them in one go, but you should know about it. UV editor, UV mapping, cube projection, and I think that's enough for today. But these are all the things. There's more things we learned, like image projection and how to prevent the texture from getting distorted using edit mode. So there's a lot of things we covered today which need to be learned through repetition. Repetition is the key. So yeah, I hope you understand this lecture. Keep rewatching it. I'll send you some tutorials on YouTube, and you can also watch Ian Hubert and more tutorials on YouTube, and you'll understand it soon enough. That's all I had to say. Thank you for joining the class.